How's it going? Anybody and everybody who might be watching this is Alex T Zombie with another. I was gonna say weekday upload, but it's been more than a week since I last updated, and it's also not the weekday when I'm recording this, and most likely will not be uploading it on a weekday. Regardless, today I'm bringing you guys yet another excuse to show off my new library trade hall build that I've been working on for the past 2 months. I'm not gonna give away the interior just yet. I'm gonna give it its own separate video today. However, we are gonna focus on one part of the library. If we were to walk inside of here, and it's gonna be kind of hard for you guys to imagine, but bear with me. If you were to walk into the library and then make your way down to this area, you guys can see, aside from it needing a little bit finishing touches, if we start to make our way down, this is looking pretty nice. However, we arrive at a blank slate, an empty canvas that I still need to fill with something, and this is going to be the focus of today's video, is what exactly I want to fit here. So if you clicked on this and you read the thumbnail, obviously you already know where I'm alluding to. I want to add something interactable and interesting for the players. I have an iron farm and a gold farm inside of this trade hall build, and I need the storage to be somewhere underneath it. More specifically, I want it to be inside of a vault, and I didn't think it would be cool to just walk your way down and then you have like a, I know how to make a combination lock selector panel thing, and I will show you guys that a little bit more towards the end of the video. However, I am not too happy with just placing a storage here or an iron door and then leading it down to another area. I thought, you know what, I want this to have a little bit more of a kick to it, and that's when I thought to myself, what better way to achieve this than by adding ourselves a flying machine elevator that we can take between the last remaining floors of our library. Let me just turn down the sound a little bit. So, oh, it went back down. If you're like me, then you're Redstone inclined enough to be confident to take on a project like this. However, I've never done a project like this, nor do I want to start from scratch, because flying machines can be quite a bit of a intimidating area of Redstone that I haven't exactly tackled with too much, and I have quite a bit of questions. For example, how do I tell it to go up, and how do I tell it to go down, and how do I differentiate between the two, and how do I even send the signals down enough to do that? So the first thing I did, obviously, was I took to YouTube and I started asking these questions to the algorithm, or more specifically the search box, in order for it to help me in my research. That's when I came across Tom Coe's video. Currently, I have the flying machine stuck in place, because if I were to just have loaded it in, you guys saw all those things firing at the same time, it would have broken. And here we can already see it alluding at one of the issues that we're going to tackle here in a second. But for what it's worth, if I was just playing by myself, right? I select the floor, the flying machine receives instruction, and it moves to that floor. You guys can see that it stops at that floor using these pistons here. If the pistons are extended, it won't register them as a movable object. It'll almost see them as, for example, obsidian or glazed terracotta, and it won't try to pull them, and it'll just fly past them. But if they're de-extended, they'll stick to the slime blocks, and that'll allow the flying machine to reach its 12 piston push limits and keep it stuck on that floor. So that's how you decide what floor we take it to. This other part is kind of a little bit hard to see at first, but for example, if I were to select the third floor, what happens is the first thing, these pistons de-extend, and that would allow it, or that will be the way that we anchor it at the floor that's selected. At the same time that happens, this sends a signal powering our trapdoor here, and then that propagates the signal downward. Any floors that are beneath it will see this via this observer here, and then that will power our flying machine, sending it back up. If it's on a floor above it, right? Again, once we select the third floor, it will power this dropper. The observer will detect that, and it will propagate the signal upward, sending it back down. So if I selected the third floor, you guys will notice this powers, those observers detect that, and it sends it back down. It's anchored by the pistons, and we're all happy. Now, if you're playing single player, this is all you need, right? You select the floor you want to go to. You stand inside of the elevator. It sends you to that floor. Once you've arrived, you walk out, do what you're gonna do, select another floor, get back inside the elevator, and you're happy and everything's good and happy and everybody's happy and everything, you know, the machine is happy. However, I'm not playing single player. I'm not building that whole trade hall just for myself. I mean, yes, it is for me, obviously, because I think it looks really nice, but it's also for a community that I've been putting together the last 2 months. So what this means is that there's going to be multiple players on the server at once, and this is where we can start to run into a couple issues. The first real big issue would be spamming of the buttons. Players, if a player joins and they're bored and they're just running around one day, chances are they're going to end up breaking my machine, or Tomco's machine for this matters, because they're just, you know, they're not too aware of the fact that if they spam this, it's delicate and it can break. And I also don't want to have to tell them, hey, you can't spam it, because that's kind of lame. You know, I expect a little bit more, or no, I expect less of I expect less of people, so I don't get disappointed. But what I'm trying to say is, if there's multiple players on the server, somebody's on the second floor, the elevator's on the second floor, and then somebody calls it to the third floor, and so on and so forth, and then the buttons are being spammed and stuff, it breaks. So again, Tomco's design, very, very impressive. When I saw this, I was blown away how simple it is, how efficient it is, how little blocks it actually required. I thought it was going to be something way more complicated. It took me a little bit of a while to understand what was going on with how it got sent up and down, but once I got the gist of it, I realized that it's actually a very elegant machine. However, if they sacrifice simplicity and a lower block count for the fact that it can break if you spam it a little bit too hard. So that's what we're going to do in today's episode. We're going to take this, or today's video, we're going to take this, and we're going to do our best at spawn proofing it, and then building one from the ground up in order to then build over on our server. The first thing we need to tackle, here we have Tomco's selector panel. And again, I had gotten at the fact that if you spam signals too quickly, it has a chance of breaking. Whenever I update one of these walls, whenever I select a floor that we want, it sends the signal downward via this walls of walls, and then and then the observer detects that update. The first thing it does is it shoots any blocks that are inside our droppers facing upward into the dropper facing into it facing downward. If I were to remove these torches for now, as we'll notice, if I update this, all of them turn on. And then the way we differentiate between signals is by powering the top dropper, sending the block back down, and then that allows us to select only one column at a time. So again, I'm going to place a block. This is going to update all of our droppers, pushing all of the blocks up. The comparators are going to read that. And then notice that if the first column is picked, or the fourth, for whatever reference you're looking at it from, it will only power this dropper corresponding to it. And that's how we're able to discern between different floors. Why does it break? Why does it have a chance of selecting multiple floors at once? The reason for this is because of this redstone line here. You guys will notice that if I power these two in rapid succession of each other, Right there, you guys saw that second time, it only flickered once. What should happen is the redstone line should power on and then off twice, one for every selection. But if they're too fast in succession, as the redstone dust is powering off from the first set of instructions, the second one is already powering it again. So it stays lit, and in the end, the first dropper doesn't get a chance to push the block back up into this dropper, resetting it and then selecting only one slice at a time. So this is why normally it's fine, but too fast and eventually it'll break. What this means is that at some point we need to find a way to remove one of the blocks responsible for inputs from all of the columns once one is selected, allowing only one signal to pass by at a time. To help you guys visualize this a little bit better, and also whenever you're designing any type of redstone, normally a good rule of thumb is to just start big, and once you get the concepts down, you can then try and shorten it and compact everything. Here you guys can see that what happens is whenever we select a column, the block that we want gets powered, but then the other ones get pushed out of the way, meaning that now whenever we try to receive any more redstone signals, nothing will process until we reset everything, including the selected slice, now allowing for a different one to get selected. Now, this one seemed pretty promising. Aside from, I'm not too happy with the way it looks, but it still looked pretty promising of a contender. However, you guys will notice that one, if we select two columns simultaneously, it's not able to discern from the two. And if we power two of them in rapid succession of each other, i.e. if we start spamming it, eventually it'll break. It didn't solve any of our issues, but it did take us towards a closer, and I started to think myself that definitely there's gonna have to be some type of block that acts as a bridge, that acts as an input that we remove out of the way until it's safe to receive any new signals. And this will also help with keeping the machine from breaking, because the reason it breaks is that it receives signals as it's moving. And if it's in motion and one of these pistons get powered, if you guys remember from earlier, if the piston is extended while it's trying to be moved, it'll stay where it's at, breaking our entire flying machine. So I thought to myself, okay, first question, is it possible, is there a way to discern from two signals being selected at the same time? Or better yet, is there a way that I can funnel all four signals into one spot, and as soon as it receives one signal, it immediately removes the input, meaning that any other signals that we try to process will get ignored until it's safe to receive new instruction, or in other words, until the flying machine has arrived at the floor selected. This then takes us to this design, where again we funnel all of the signals into one location. As soon as we receive a signal, we push an input block out of the way, meaning that we can no longer receive any more signals. And if two signals were to be spammed, if I could spam it. If two signals were to be spammed in rapid succession, only one signal will ever be processed. And in the same fashion, if two signals were to be sent simultaneously, it'll still only ever process one signal. So you guys will see here that signal strength of 1, 2, 3, and 4. The way this works is from the fact that every block a redstone line travels, it loses a signal strength of 1. So this 1 nearest to our input will be sending a signal of 15, and that's why it'll send it all the way down to the 4th redstone lamp. The same idea for 14, 13, and 12. So this block right here is 12 blocks long from the very beginning, 13, 14, and 15. Now that we have our components laid out in front of us, we can then start to simplify the machine. And the way we do this is by taking the redstone signal inputted and we subtract from it the number of blocks that aren't in use. We have 4 different outputs corresponding to the 4 different columns. So we have a line of 11 blocks long that isn't being used. So all we have to do is just subtract that from our input. And in the end, we arrive at the same result in a smaller space. And again, if we have 2 inputs being sent in rapid succession, or 2 inputs being processed simultaneously, it'll only ever process 1 input at a time, and that'll be the stronger of the 2 inputs. Now, we've turned this from a problem of spamming and simultaneous inputs to a problem of discerning from different signal strengths. So now what we need is a machine that only outputs a signal when a corresponding specific signal strength is inputted. It just so happens that I had already tackled a very similar issue when it came to my combination lock selector panel that I had uploaded in a previous video at some point. If you guys want to go check that out over at my channel. So the way this works is, again, we have signal strengths that we want to discern from each other. In this scenario, what we wanted was a series of signal strengths that move their way down, and only when those specific signal strengths are inputted in a specific order will an output be processed. If we input 4, 1, and 7, you guys will see that the lamp turns on. If we were to input any other random assortment of numbers, nothing will happen. It works off of the idea of this guy being only at a redstone signal of 1, i.e. the input is 1 greater than this one's output. This would be a redstone signal of 1. This would be in an off state. The torch will also be turned off because of the comparator, meaning that once this repeater turns back on, it'll be locked in an off state. This then unlocks the next section, whenever that receives, right, and this is probably a better example, there is no processing here. This one's only receiving the redstone signal. So you guys will notice here that once one is processed, once one enters this cell, this torch will turn off. At the same time that that's happening, so is turning off this comparator, unlocking our repeater, allowing it for new updates. But there will be no signal strength powering our repeater because this one's turned off, the torch is turned off, and only a signal strength of 1 is being inputted. So this dust will end up in an off state. This guy will turn off. The comparator will then turn back on, locking it back again in an off state. If we put all of this together, if I send a redstone signal of 1, 1 will get processed. If I send a signal strength of 2, it doesn't work. Now, as for the reason that it doesn't work is because of lousy craftsmanship. I realized that the cells are still connected even though I tried to separate them. I got rid of the repeaters that worked as locks for the next cell, and so on and so forth. And it is possible to go down this route because this is a very strong circuit. So all we have to do is snake this and turn it at 90 degrees. So this target block here would actually end up somewhere along over here. And then on top of this guy, we would have the torch. And then the next cell would be turned another 90 degrees. So now we'll go this way at a corner. And then the torch would be like somewhere over here, probably a little bit closer. However, there's two very prominent issues with this, with doing that. The first is that it's getting rather messy really quickly. And if we're looking to build torch towers leading all the way up to the flying machines or the different floors, imagine we have the first target block is here, which is fine. The torch can go here. But then the second one goes 3 blocks away from it, so it will go here, which is okay, not too bad. But then the other one is another 3 blocks this way, so now it's like somewhere around here, and it's just making a mess of all the things. And then the other one is somewhere over here, so you guys can start to see that we're not gonna have a lot of space left over for our torch towers, and they're also gonna be in the way of this, and it's not very ideal. And then on top of that, it's very expensive. Remember, I want to build this in survival at some point, and I know it's not possible to match Tomco's material cost, because obviously, you know, we're sacrificing the low material count for not functionality, because it's the same functionality. I don't know, bro. To make it safe, that's what we're doing. I apologize. I didn't write a script for this. We need a way to discern between signal strengths 1, 2, 3, and 4. So I sat there, and aside from complaining that this doesn't work, because I really thought it was gonna work after I put it together, I started thinking to myself, right? What do I have to do to only power one of them when that specific signal strength is inputted? And I started thinking to myself for what must have been the better half of 3 hours. It was like 1 hour. Okay, fine. It was like 30 seconds that I was sitting there thinking to myself. But I was thinking, okay, what do I do? How do I do? And like a flash of lightning, right? Like a bolt of lightning, it hit me. It struck me. And I realized, right? Stay with me. Stay with me now. 3 is less than 4. Okay, some of you might be like, yep, he lost it. And all these combination locks and elevators and flying machines, he's lost it. No, if I did lose it, I had lost it a long time ago working with other machines. This one wasn't actually that bad. This one was actually kind of fun to work on. But again, 3 is less than then 4. So what I mean by this, if we power 3, 4 won't get powered, at least in this scenario. The signal strength isn't long enough to propagate all the way down this redstone line. So if we power 1, only 1 powers. If we power 2, only 2 and then 1 powers. This means what we really need is not so much a circuit that only powers when a specific signal strength inputs. Instead, we need a way to keep the descending signal strengths, the descending inputs or outputs, from powering once its predecessor has been processed. And this is actually as simple as just adding in repeaters in this formation. So now you guys will notice if I power 1, again only 1 powers because it's the only one with the short enough signal or redstone line length, whatever, to process the signal strength. But now if I power 2, only 2 will power. 3, and finally 4. And the way this happens, the way this works is, for example, if I were to send a signal strength of 3, we don't have to worry about 4, so this can be ignored. Now here, this line powers signal strength of 3 is sent down the line here. This guy will turn on, this redstone lamp. Simultaneously, these 2 repeaters will also power. Notice, this repeater will lock the repeater for the next adjacent cell in an off state, meaning that 1 redstone tick later, when the signal strength of 3 tries to power this lamp, it'll get stopped by the fact that its repeater is in an off state. And in the same fashion, any descending redstone lines will be met with the same situation. So if we power 3, 4 is ignored, 3 is lit, 2 is locked in an off state, and so is 1. And finally, we have arrived at a spam-proof selector panel that won't receive any new signals until we want it to. Before I do go ahead and move on, I do think it is worth mentioning that the more floors, the more inputs that you add to the selector panel, the longer it's going to get. And it gets pretty dramatic pretty quickly. So I would just keep that in mind, a little bit of a disclaimer. If you think about it, it's 2 blocks horizontally per input or output. So that means that if we go all the way up to 15 different inputs, we're going to need 30 blocks of space horizontally. Now that we finally found a selector panel that is consistent and more reliable, or spam proof for that matter, that his is just as reliable, this one's just more dependable, I guess, what we can do is we can bring back our droppers. Place the ones facing upward, and then we can face the ones facing downward. What we next need to do is we need to throw any item in the bottommost dropper that you don't really need, or you can just do without. Stuff that you just have lying around all the time, you know what I mean? So then what'll happen is that only the one that is selected will shoot the item up into the topmost dropper, and then the comparator will read that. So if we select 3, only 3 will get powered, and it'll stay powered. And this takes us to our next issue, which is pretty easy to fix. If we then were to try and input a different floor or whatever column, you guys will notice that the first one stayed powered. So what we need to do is send a signal from this guy. I don't think it's gonna make it all the way down, so let's check. It does actually, yeah. So now anytime we select a floor or column, again, the corresponding light will power. And whenever it's safe to select a new one and give the machine a new set of instructions, at the same time that it's selecting its corresponding column, it is also resetting all of the previous ones. So if we go ahead and select 4 now, it fixes it. And because we're only sending a signal through this block, any type of spamming will no longer break the machine. We can also go ahead and test it for simultaneous redstone pushes. And you guys will notice that 2 signals are being processed at the same time. However, this one will arrive at the input at a signal strength of 14, and this one will arrive at the input at a signal strength of 13. So this means that by default, it's only ever gonna prioritize and process the stronger redstone signal or the column closest to our input. So this means that no matter how many times I do this, it'll only ever stay stuck at a signal at whatever column is the closest. And in the same fashion, if we have 2 pulses being processed, one right after the other, you guys will see there the redstone line below powers back on as soon as it powers off, and yet we don't have to worry about any issues here. Finally, we're able to put everything together, and this arrives us at the finished elevator flying machine design. I did also go ahead and took the liberty of adding the keypad combination lock, because the idea behind it is that I want to have the vault at one of these, so I need to make it so that only when you enter the correct key will send you to that floor, and then that way I can hide it behind a combination and stuff and things and everything and who knows what. So the way this works, this button calls the elevator. I'm not too happy with this design, but eventually I'll make it look a little bit nicer. And let's say I was in survival. What'll happen here is you go up to the combination lock, you pick up the book and place it back down. That'll input one digit into the code. So right now I just have it at 321, and this will send us down. After a couple seconds, it'll send us down to whatever floor that combination corresponds to. And just like that, we have this elevator. And I won't get too much in depth with the other selector panels, pretty self-explanatory. You press a button, they send a signal to the corresponding wall that you want, or the corresponding floor that you want to get taken to, and stuff like that. This down here we're familiar with already. This is what we just finished coming up with. Then moving on, we have the torch towers that send a signal to the different floors. Same idea as Tomco's, where telling the flying machine where to go using this column of observers and droppers. We also have this section using the trapdoor trick that sends a signal to the floors beneath the flying machine or whatever, or telling it to go up, and then the other one tells it to go down, is what I was trying to say. So we're pretty familiar with that so far. Everything looks good. Now, what I do need to catch you guys on up to speed on is, first off, whenever the flying machine makes it to the floor we want it to make it to, we need a way to tell our selector panel down here that it's safe to push the block down in order to receive new instruction. So the way I did that, you guys will notice that I have another wall here, and this wall is only updated whenever our flying machine arrives at the floor that it's determined to arrive at. So if I send it to the 4th floor here, if I make it move up by a block, This floor will get selected. The flying machine will make its way up. Once it arrives there, that'll send a signal propagating all the way down, and you guys saw there, it'll push it downward. Now, there is one more issue, and that's that if it was on the same floor that was selected, so let's say we're on this floor, somebody's gonna, it's a button, so people are gonna want to walk down and press the button. If that happens, the flying machine isn't moving. So what we need to do now is tell it, hey, the flying machine is already there. Send a signal down to the safety latch so that it's able to receive new instruction again. And since we can't move it up and down, what I end up doing instead is I make it so that whenever this torch tower receives a pulse, we also send that pulse down, and via a repeater we power the comparator. Since it's on subtract mode, it'll subtract the signal of 15 that it's receiving from the redstone block and the signal of 15 that is being inputted into it. So 15 minus 15, it'll be 0. It'll turn off, and then since it's a pulse, this will shut off and it'll shut back on, and then that we can then observe and send a pulse down to the safety latch and fix that issue. This also takes care of another problem, which is that if the flying machine is passing from, let's say, the 4th floor to the 3rd floor, or it's passing by one of the floors, we don't want it to activate the safety latch prematurely. So if we have this line leading into the comparator, it'll always stay turned off even while it's flying by it. So if I call it to the 2nd floor, oh, I missed it. It was on the 2nd floor. I should have been looking at. So yeah, let's send it back to the 4th floor. I apologize for that. A little bit of a mistake of mine. So again, it's gonna pass by the 2nd floor. The redstone is gonna power on, but the comparator is incapable of turning on, and then the observer won't detect any change. So that's what we have this circuit there for. Lastly, we do have 2 more repeaters here. What these are responsible for is ensuring that whenever the same floor is selected, what happens is it only pulses this trapdoor once. You guys see there, it pulses twice, and that's because this comparator turns off because this repeater turns on. The observer detects that, it sends a signal. But then this repeater turns off, allowing the comparator to turn back on, and the observer detects that again and sends another signal. And that's not what we want. We'd want only one signal at a time. Otherwise, it does have a chance of breaking, and it would, basically you're giving it a chance if somebody's spamming it to break the machine. So that's why we add a repeater there on 2 ticks leading into that repeater in front of our observer. And this now makes it so that whenever the same floor is selected, it'll only ever send a pulse of 1 down the line here. After that, the only other thing left to talk about are the doors of the elevator. What I have going on here, I reset that on accident. What I have going on here is, you guys will notice that this torch is powering the redstone line that's keeping our pistons extended. So if I were to remove this redstone block, the doors will close. So that's the first bit of logic for the door. But the other thing you need to think about is, again, if the elevator is passing by a floor, the doors are going to want to open because this guy is going to power. So what we do in order to avoid that is we connect this line up to the torch tower. So if the floor isn't selected, what will happen is, yes, the flying machine with the redstone block will power off this torch, but as long as this one remains active, the doors will remain closed, and you won't have them pulse and open and then close in front of you as you're traveling down or up the different floors. And after that, I think that's it. I'm pretty sure I should have caught you guys up with the redstone regarding our elevator here. only thing left to do now is to build it. I'm not gonna build it here on the creative world because I've already built it. This is actually where I designed it. These are all the different steps that I took. I did try to take you guys through the process as best as possible, weeding at the same and while at the same time weeding out all the different, you know, brainstorming that I did and all the different steps. I tried my best at, you know, only showing you guys the steps that actually took me somewhere. And again, this is Tom Co's design that I started with. I had already started adding some doors to it. What I did previously was, I guess, not important. You guys probably don't care at this point. If you guys enjoyed, please remember to leave a like, comment, subscribe, turn on bell notifications. That'll help greatly when it comes to my motivation and me actually pushing out these videos as fast as possible. I'm pretty excited about that. I won't be showing the interior of this build because it's gonna come in a future episode. So if you guys don't want to miss out on that, just remember, you know, and do all those things that I just mentioned. However, I will show you guys this a little bit of a sneak peek. I'm a little bit too close. You guys saw the swords outside anyways. It's fine. So yeah, again, I hope you guys enjoyed. In case I never see you guys' beautiful faces again, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your lives. Until next time, it was Zombie.